I showed you this of the shorebirds, and I didn't record it, but you can look at it on Moodle, and I just want you to think about what it looks like in terms of what those shorebirds are doing. And since it's during the day, I guess one hypothesis could have been feeding, but if you look at shorebirds, you'll notice that most of them don't feed while flying. Terns do, but they're a different group. And so, obviously, if you see a group of them diving in the water and stuff, you'd expect feeding. But when you see these groups flying and turning and shifting, just think about what it does to your visual field and what it might do to a predator. I also showed a picture or a video of a bald eagle getting mobbed. So think about that. Obviously, mobbing is probably safer than dive bombing bald eagle by itself, but I'll tell you actually, if an eagle's not flying, there's really not much danger from it. A big gull colony. It's like safety is in numbers, but also you tend to see mobbing behavior. So there's this one hypothesis is there's a predator distraction hypothesis, right? You're trying to get rid of them. So some of the predictions that you would make. First of all, you would expect mobbing gulls to actually have an effect on the predator in terms of, let's say, energy expenditure. So in terms of mobbing gulls should force predators to expend more effort to find eggs or chicks. The benefit experienced by mobbing gulls in protecting their eggs from nest predators should be directly proportional to the extent that predators are actually mobbed. So these are black-headed gulls. On the left, we have probability that crow will be subject to greater than 10 attacks by gulls per minute, and then percentage of successful predation attempts on this side. If you actually look, outside the colony, the percentage of successful predation attempts, well, it's probably going to be higher. But the thing is, inside the colony, you find instead that, like right here, so this is outside the colony, low, like a crow will be subject to attack, and then in the border, somewhere in between, so it's a somewhat linear relationship. And then this one, successful, well, if you're outside the colony, you're going to be successful, but you're not going to find too many eggs, are you? And, of course, inside the colony, you're going to be even less successful because you're going to be driven away. So this is some of the predictions that you would actually make in terms of when you would find mobbing behavior. So if a crow comes along and is outside the colony where there aren't very many nests and eggs, you know, they might mob them a little bit, but they're not really going to be all that concerned about it. Okay. Oh, good. Another. Again, this is just a picture, but if you want to look at the YouTube, just go to the Attenborough, and there's also, oh, where is that? Oh, there was another one too. I think I put it on, there's another one where ground squirrels are mobbing a rattlesnake. So in terms of, now, we think we oftentimes know what's going on. this is back to when we're talking about Darwin. Alternative hypotheses. Now sometimes we just take one hypothesis and then we compare it to, let's say, the null hypothesis. Or like with these ground squirrels, and looking at one prediction you could make is that in areas where there's no snakes, they wouldn't show much immunity to venom, and the other you would. Okay. Now, you could also bring up a whole series of alternate hypotheses and test them all. Usually, obviously, you test predictions, but a lot of times you can still have the same hypothesis be true, like multiple hypotheses that don't exclude each other necessarily. So there can be a number of different things going on at one time. Of course, are they mutually exclusive? So the formulation of an alternative hypothesis goes on until we find, well, obviously you want to refute a hypothesis. And if you can't, then there may be some conditional support for it. The thing is, a lot of times in evolutionary biology, it was really a problem earlier, is that everybody thinks that everything is an adaptive hypothesis. It has to be adaptive. Well, we know that that's not true. You can have a hypothesis for something that is just because of evolutionary history and not what is called current utility. So what do you think current utility means compared to okay, let's think about birds and feathers. What were feathers probably first used for? Huh? Mating. So display? Insulation. Right. So now birds that fly, some people would say those feathers, flight feathers, are actually used for current utility. Actually, feathers are also used for all those different things, as a matter of fact. But you have to oftentimes distinguish between things that individual species inherited from their ancestors and those that evolved in, let's say, the current environment. Okay? So we could make the same sort of thing with, look at other rodents like that are related to squirrels, the whole squirrel family, and make some predictions about where we would see, let's say, mobbing behavior. And we see it in other places, right? And in fact, you can find ground squirrels in Africa that do the same sort of thing. They don't have rattlesnakes there. They have cobras and mambas and things like that. I don't know if any of those ground squirrels evolve antivenom. I'm not sure. But they might, and you might predict that. But remember, not every explanation is necessarily adaptive. Sometimes, because of the panda principle, evolving something that would be adaptive would be great, but it ain't going to happen. It's like, why aren't there flying pigs? Right? I've talked about this before. Why can't, I wish that we could humans could evolve wings. Wouldn't it be cool? We could just take off and fly. I mean, the only time I get to fly is in my dreams, and it's just not quite the same. So, a lot of the reason that there aren't certain traits that would be, let's say, useful is that there's phylogenetic constraint. The lineage just has not is canalized in the way it develops, and there's really no way for that to change. I mean, obviously, there's some lineages of mammals, bats, that have evolved flying. but there's only, one clade of mammals that actually does that. So when we think about hypotheses, we always have to think it doesn't necessarily mean that we're looking at something that's adaptive. You can have something that you might think is adaptive, but it's really not. So we talked a little bit about the comparative method. We're going to be going through something right now. The thing that we often ask is, why might species share similar phenotypes or different phenotypes? And we've talked about this. One is shared ancestry. One is a similar selective environment. So what is that called when two lineages have similar traits? Convergent evolution, right. And then, of course, if you actually see related individual species that have different traits, then you could kind of assume, well, there's differential selection going on at that point, and you can test for that. So here's a nesting colony of black-headed gulls. In terms of mobbing behavior, obviously, if birds are living in a solitary lifestyle, they're not going to be mobbing with a group of others. They might go after something by themselves, but so here we have a bunch of, let's see, I think they're black-headed gulls or Franklin gulls or something like that, in a colony nesting or starting to build nests. Britain. Now, when would you, let's go back to, damn it, again. Okay, so here we are, some cliff nesting birds. First of all, cliff nesting suggests that there's going to be solitary nesting behavior. It would be unusual to find, I mean, you'll find a colony with a whole bunch of nests, and they're kind of colonial, but they're all going to have their own nest, separate from everybody else. There's another thing. They're on a cliffside, and you would expect, instead of having a large-bodied gull, something really substantial, that in fact you might end up with having small body size favored for gulls nesting on cliffs. And these aren't all gulls. These are kittiwakes, I think. Up there on top, those are mirrors. A lot of times you get multi-species nesting going on. So in some birds, there's actually many species all using the same site for nesting. And they'll still exhibit mobbing behavior, as a matter of fact. Of course, you always have to wonder, well, if you're mobbing, you're kind of a more risk. You're expending more energy. So you have to wonder what would stop a freeloader from getting the benefits and not expending. I don't know how well, normally you would think, well, maybe there's a police force, or there's cultural norms, or animals can distinguish between ones they can trust and ones they can't. I don't think it is that way with gulls. I think it's just kind of like the warm and fuzzies that we feel. They all automatically, when there's a predator coming in, they all mob. So it could just be that they're actually not mobbing to help each other. It could be that they're doing it just individually, and it looks like they're mobbing. So how would you test that? What would you predict in terms of these gulls, in terms of aggressive behavior to drive something off. Under what conditions would they, if they were doing it to help each other, well, where would you expect it? When they're all together. Would you expect the same sort of behavior when they're off by themselves? Well, perhaps not. When we look at the spring box, the ones that bounce up and down to inform predators that you're wasting your time, if it was group defense or group increased vigilance, they would only do it when they're surrounded by their own group members. Versus, we'll see that if they're only doing it, or they're doing it only when a predator shows up, then there's a different hypothesis and a different prediction. So here we are back again. It's a different phylogeny. So we've got a swallow lineage and a gull lineage. And we've got distinct ancestry, in other words, different. In terms of ground nesting gulls or bank swallow and other colonial swallows, we might expect both to show shared mobbing behavior. Solitary nesting, obviously, they're not going to share mobbing behavior because they're not around anybody else. But in this case, we've got some ground nesting gulls, and if you remember before, the ones on the cliff, those were kittiwakes. And kittiwakes are individual nesters on cliff faces. That's where they normally nest. So here we have shared ancestry, and then between the kittiwakes and the ground nesting gulls, we have divergent selection. And so we have different traits. In terms of colonial behavior, we have convergent evolution, because we know that it would be, you would think, unusual. Bank swallows and gulls are much different lineages, obviously. So you wouldn't expect that it was handed down from their ancestors. And of course, similar selection pressures would obviously explain it. So this is just a comparative method that we've kind of dealt with before. Okay, now there's been a lot of work on bats and moths and this kind of arms race that's going on. And there's a noctuid moth, and what it has is, it has this membrane that acts like an eardrum. So when there's sound, whether it's high-pitched echolocation sounds or whatever, very sensitive to those sounds. And it's considered an anti-predator adaptation because it apparently enables individuals to hear and avoid nocturnal ultrasound using bats. So you want to test this hypothesis via the comparative method. We're going to give you some examples, and I want you to try to figure out what is what. So identify the utility of each of the following lines of evidence. Now, in terms of utility, I mean current utility. Is it adaptive at this point? Is it the same environment? Is it shared ancestry? So specify whether these cases involve convergent evolution, divergent evolution, or shared ancestry. Okay, so here's the noctuid moths, just so you know. They've got an ear with auditory receptors on their abdomen. They've got thoracic ganglia in terms of how they're actually working neurologically. And then here's what the receptors look like. You've got these air sacs, and then you've got these receptor cells that actually then relay the message to other parts of the body. And this is what the bat does. He emits those sounds, right? And let's see. You can actually, this is a phylogeny of it. So look at this. So almost all other species of noctuid moths have ears that respond to ultrasound. Okay? It seems like, what does that appear to say to you about what's ancestral and what's not? They all share. It's ancestral. Okay. Now, okay. So, for example, so we would label that shared ancestry, SA. Here's another one. Almost all species in the evolutionary lineage that includes the noctuid moths and several other groups also have ears that respond to ultrasound. Would that be shared ancestry? Would it be convergent evolution, or would it be divergent evolution? Okay, almost all species in an evolutionary lineage, okay, in one lineage, that includes the noctuid moths, have these ear-like things. It's not divergent lineages, it's one lineage. So we could say that perhaps these ears evolved one time in not just in the noctuids, but in the whole lineage that led to the noctuids. That'd be shared ancestry. Some diurnal noctuid moths have ears, but are largely or totally incapable of hearing ultrasound. Would that be divergent selection, where they've lost the ability? Or convergent evolution? Or shared ancestry? Let's ask, would it be convergent evolution? Anybody raise their hands if they think it's convergent? Is it divergent evolution? Okay, don't be afraid. It's okay to be wrong, really. Almost all butterflies, which belong to the same large evolutionary grouping as the noctuids, are usually active during the day, and they lack ears to detect ultrasound. Okay. Now, why would they lack ears? Because bats don't come out at night, and don't come out during the day, and anything that's is out during the day is going to be using visual ways to hunt. Okay, so is this shared ancestry? Or is this divergent selection? Okay, so remember, part of this evolutionary grouping are noctuids. And some of those noctuids most of them are actually only out at night. So in terms of the butterflies, they're only active during the day, right? So we would expect that to be divergent evolution as well. So 6 species of noctuid moths found only on the Pacific islands of Tahiti and Moorea have ears and can hear ultrasound, but do not react to the stimulus with anti-bat responses, such as diving for cover. Is this divergent evolution or convergent evolution? I think you'd have to look at actually the noctuids and whether they form a lineage in terms of for all the islands. Probably they do. Okay, so in that case, I mean, they could have all independently evolved, not having ears, or having ears but they don't respond independently, or they could have only lost it once in the first colonist, and then after that they've all lost it because there's no bats there. So members of one small group of nocturnal butterflies have ears on their wings and can hear ultrasounds. And they actually respond to ultrasonic stimulation by engaging in unpredictable dives. And, just so you know, they're related to other groups that don't have it, that don't have, let's say, the wings. But then there's other lineages in the group that are separate that do have wings. So would that be conversion or divergence? Huh? It's convergence. It's not a really good example. It's what one of they're using in the book. Here's better though. Lacewings and praying mantises fly at night and have ears that detect ultrasound and lead to anti-bat defensive behavior. Lacewings and mantises are from wildly different insect lineages. So that's a clear example of convergent evolution because of similar selective pressure. So here we are again. The first one is shared ancestry. The second one is shared ancestry. The third, fourth, and fifth are all divergent evolution, and the last two are convergent evolution. But the one for number 6 isn't really a very good example of that. Okay. So we can also use the comparative method for a whole bunch of other things, like food caching and foraging behavior, neuroecology, like with the bat stuff, neuroendocrinology, so correlations between ecology and hormones. Now, the one drawback of the comparative method, of course, is that it's only correlations because you're looking at evolutionary history. But you can combine it with some stuff currently that you can do. So let's say with the bats, you can get a nice phylogeny and see, well, it looks like this is ancestral behavior versus not. And then you can see where lineages have diverged. And then you can actually test those different hypotheses as far as losing the ears, or the noctuid moths also, it turns out, use these ears, amazingly enough, to communicate with each other. In other words, they're able to actually make echolocation sounds, and they use it to communicate with each other. Some people would say, okay, that is current utility versus the ancestral thing, which was that they evolved because of anti-predator defense. Even though it's still adaptive for both, perhaps. So, why are some weaver birds social? These are different species, of course, but they tend to form these big colonies. Now, you could say, well, perhaps it's anti-predator behavior. Also, could it also be diet? So, if it was diet, you might say patchy seed distribution. It's easier to find seeds in a group foraging than in one individual foraging. Of course, you might expect also that within a group there's going to be some individuals that are better at finding food than others. In terms of predators, we could make differential predictions in terms of Okay, what's going on with predation? What is their main problem with predation? Well, there might be something coming in there and grabbing them, but they're probably nest predators. In this case, probably cuckoos that lay their eggs in their nests. So we could make a prediction if it's actually, let's say, to avoid nest predation, that they use it to chase away, let's say, cuckoos. Of course, in terms of cause and effect, so diet caused social living, or did social living end up resulting in foraging in a specific way? In social living, did predators cause individuals to live socially, or does socially invite predators? Okay, so that's a problem with correlations. Then you have to go individually and see what actually might be the cause of this, in terms of especially if there's still selective behavior going on. Okay. So there's these ants, and when they mate, they all mate while they're flying around. So they all gather in a huge bunch, flying around, the males and the females. And they're, the thing is, they're at risk, much like the shorebirds were. First of all, their mind is only on one thing, mating. And so the big problem is that there's actually predators around, like dragonflies, that pick them off. Now, think back to the shorebirds analogy and the falcon about who would be more likely to not get eaten, whether you were solitary or, in fact, whether you were in a group. Okay? So, there's actually pros and cons for each one. Where would you expect, where would you like to hunt if you were hunting? Would you actually like to look for a whole group? Well, a whole group would be much more conspicuous. Let's say you want to shoot a bunch of some elk. Well, you'd look for a bunch of elk, like a harem, with a male, a bunch of females, and then some other males that would like to be the dominant male. Or would you rather just go out and track, a solitary deer? Well, obviously, if you're going to track a solitary deer, he's at risk. There's no one else to take the predator away from him. At the same time, when you're in a group like that, you're much more conspicuous. That's where the predator is going to be. The predator is going to probably be where the group is. There's a lot more opportunities to nail something. The thing is, there's a dilution effect here again. You've got this predator, and the predators might, let's say, take, a couple of hundred of these guys out of the air. But there's literally thousands. So the probability of actually getting eaten is pretty low among the group. Of course, if you're solitary and predators aren't chasing solitary animals but are looking for groups, then you're pretty safe as well. So you have to think about it carefully in terms of defense, about what would be a better defense. The dilution effect. Now, think about how ants normally live together. Do they live singly or in groups? In groups. So, deer don't usually live they're singles, or they don't necessarily make one big group that they hang out together in. So in this case, it's probably the dilution effect primarily because the ants are already in groups. They're already in nests, and they go through this mating behavior when, let's say, a colony is splitting or something like that. Let's see. Oh, you can watch this on Moodle. It's a response of escape behavior by worms. Actually, let's see if we got it. It's kind of neat. I'll post these worms trying to escape from burrow. So you should go to Moodle. The dilution effect. So it's basically the more you're surrounded by individuals, the more individuals you're surrounded by, the less likely you are to be eaten. So, in other words, if the group size, the chance of getting eaten if there's only 2 of you is 50%. But if the group size is, let's say, 100, then it's only 1%. However, there's something to remember about the dilution effect. A large group is much more conspicuous than a small group or being off by yourself. So there's usually some other reason that you might be avoiding predators in terms of solitary behavior versus group behavior. In terms of the moths, predation risk, probability to capture, group size. And then if you look at mayfly emerging, when the mayflies start emerging later in the season, their groups are usually much larger. And so the larger the group, the lower the predation risk, of course. And so usually emergence is very tightly controlled, and they all emerge at very roughly the same time. Now, that's a penguin. Let's see. And that's a leopard seal. It's not very nice, and he eats penguins. Now, of course, if penguins didn't have to go and feed themselves, well, they wouldn't have to worry about it, but they do. They're facing the same predation pressure, actually, that seals are around here. So if you go out to the Channel Islands, so let's say, oh, there's some big colonies on Santa Cruz or whatever. And they don't have leopard seals there, they have great white sharks. Okay? But they face the same problem. They can get picked off. The silfish herd is a little bit different than the dilution effect. So, in terms of the dilution effect, it's just a matter of being in a large group. In a selfish herd, what you want to do is you want to make it more likely that poor Jimmy is the one that gets eaten and not me, right? So, now, if let's say we had terrestrial animals and they made big aggregations, well, the ones that would be in the middle, let's say, would be less likely to get eaten. Okay? In this case, when would you most likely jump in the water? While everybody else is standing on shore, or just after everybody else jumped in? Right? So, if we actually look at this,